Discrimination Game. In Chapter 5 of Governing Texas, several racial and sexual discrimination was cited. In this tutorial, we will be focusing on 3 elements and several court cases associated with these 3 elements. We shall be focusing on methods used in discriminating by the political leaders in the early 20th century, which has now been resolved by the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The following 3 elements will be considered: 1. Women, 2. The poll tax, 3. The white primary. Women. Women before the 19th Amendment had no voting franchise in the United States. Women were allowed to vote in primaries and party conventions in Texas in 1918 and subsequently obtained the right to vote in all elections as a result of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution in 1920. However, some of the most influential politicians were opposed to the franchise for women. Joseph Warden Bailey, the Democratic leader in the U.S. House of Representatives, was in eloquent opposition for the women's suffrage, arguing that women could not vote because they could not perform the 3 basic duties of citizenship, such as jury services, posse comitatus service, citizens who are deputized to deal with an emergency, and military service. In Texas, Governor Harvey called special sessions in 1919 to consider the 19th Amendment. Thus, Texas became the 9th state and the first state in the South to ratify the Women's Suffrage Amendment. The poll tax. Enacted in 1902, it required voters to pay a tax, presumably to cover the cost of elections. Poll taxes appeared in southern states after Reconstruction as a measure to prevent African Americans from voting. The tax was usually between $1.50 and $1.75, which was a small sum but had to be paid in advance of the election. The political bosses would purchase a large number of poll tax receipts and distribute it to their workers or supporters to vote as the bosses wanted whoever. The workers would be threatened to vote or lose their job. Thus, it disenfranchised poorer people. The poll tax was made illegal in the federal elections in 1964 by the passage of the 24th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It remained legal in the state elections in Texas until 1966, when it was held unconstitutional. The white primary. The white primary law in 1903 was another method used in reducing the participation of minority in election. The oppressive restriction of the white primary was designed to minimize the political strength of African American voters. In 1923, the Texas legislature explicitly banned African Americans from voting in the Democratic primary. Since Texas was a one-party state at this time, the effect was to prevent African Americans from participating in the only real election contest. Texas was able to do this because of the 1921 U.S. Supreme Court decision, Newberry v. United States, which dealt with a federal campaign expenditures law. In interpreting the law, the court stated the primary election was in no real sense a part of manner of holding election. These cleared the way of southern states, including Texas, to discriminate against African Americans in the primaries. The legislature explicitly banned blacks from voting in the Democratic primary. Segregation of the races became a guiding principle of public policy, backed by the police power of the state and reinforced by lynching and race riots against African Americans. For all intents and purposes, African Americans had become second-class citizens, disenfranchised by the political system and marginalized by political culture. In 1927, however, the Supreme Court struck down the Texas white primary law, claiming that the legal ban on black participation was a violation of Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. In response, the Texas legislature passed another law that authorized the political parties through their state executive committees to determine the qualifications for voting in the primaries. The law, of course, allowed the parties to create white primaries. In Nixon v. Condon, 1932, the U.S. Supreme Court held that the state executive committees were acting as agents of the state and were discriminating in violation of the 14th Amendment. The case was also appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and in Grovey v. Thompson in 1935, the court held that there was no violation of the 14th Amendment. It was ruled that the 14th Amendment requires equal protection under the law for the individual of all races. However, the court said that this requirement applied to the state action, not action by private groups. Since there was no state law authorizing the white primary, the court believed that there was no state action, only discrimination by the private organization. Who needs niggers? Back to the trees, boogies. All effort were tried to operate the white primary regardless of court ruling and appeal. In Smith v. Allwright, it decided that the operation of white primary did involve unconstitutional state action. Even with the Smith decision, at least one Texas county held unofficial primaries by the Jaybird Party. This was a democratic political organization that excluded African Americans. Finally, there have been improvements in discrimination since the federal court case in the 1940s and 1950s, which has offered some hope of relief to African Americans living in Texas. The white primary was outlawed in 1944 in Supreme Court decision in Smith v. Allred. In 1950, African Americans were guaranteed admission to Texas graduate and professional schools. The segregation of public schools was outlawed by the Supreme Court in Brown v. Board of Education. In 1954, and with the 19th Amendment right to vote, there have been little no issue with discrimination. Not that we have a black president, Barack Obama. This, I believe, ends the discrimination game. Thank you.